Hi, I'm Anna Ritchie. I'm a preschool teacher in Lexington. I graduated from Eastern Kentucky University 2 years ago. I'm 24 years old, and that's my introduction.
Again, this is the Human Project, and basically what it is that it's an exploration of labels and how labels affect people. And I'm focusing on the Appalachian region at the moment and plan to expand after graduation. So the first question I want to ask you is, what label, if any, do you feel the world has placed upon you, whether it be gay, straight, trans, female, Christian, whatever the label may be, and how does it affect you?
So I went with the daughter of a mentally ill person, and it affects me in like lots of different facets of my life. For one, like growing up in a like religious household, like mental illness is not like readily acceptable in the church, so that was always kind of a thing. We thought you could like pray it away enough. If you weren't praying it away enough, then it must be you're not religious enough, or you're not committed to God enough, or whatever. There have been some like romantic relationships where once they find out you have a mentally ill mother, and not like has anxiety or depression, but like a serious disorder, and they think it's just going to be hereditary, and you're doomed to be like a crazy. They don't think a mentally ill person. They don't understand it. They just think like that crazy girl, you know. So it's in different facets affected me.
So do you care to are you comfortable talking about your mother's mental illness?
Yeah.
If you're comfortable.
Do you
with
want me
that?
to explain that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about it a little
So
bit.
my mother has dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called. It's pretty similarly related to multiple personality disorder. So growing up, she found out that she had it. It was one of those things that it was like stagnant for a long time, like it was repressed, and she didn't have like an episode or a breakdown, whatever you want to call it, until I was about 10, almost 10. And so she went to a mental institution for several months, and then she just for the rest of my life was in and out and in and out. So about like almost 15 years now. So she has like 14 different personalities, and they would just surface at different times. And there have been times that she has kind of like gone into remission, and it's not been as bad during certain periods, and there have been other times that it's been a lot more present.
Was it really difficult growing up when your mom was fully diagnosed with that disorder?
It was, because I mean my dad had to, at the time I think he had like hurt his back or something. It was on disability, and he also I think was struggling with depression and didn't realize it, and he was like really overweight at that time and had his own health issues. So he was pretty like, so mom left, first of all. She was the only one working. Dad was on disability, so the person like earning money was gone, so we were really, really hurting for money. And then dad was very like, he was there at the house, but he was very absent. So my siblings and I have 3 siblings. We're all very close, because I feel like during that entire time, and I was homeschooled at the time, so we didn't even have like outside support. So we really leaned on each other, and I feel like we're a lot closer because of that experience, which is a positive. But
Yeah, I mean that is really. I mean I can't imagine how difficult that was to just have that support system just fade away. So you were saying that like the stigma around mental illness is what has affected you. So the label mentally ill, would you say that is what the label is that affects you, is mentally ill?
yeah, I think it's like once somebody close to you has mental illness, it affects everybody close to them. Everybody gets that stigma. Everybody gets that where they're kind of tiptoeing because they're nervous about the subject, and they don't really understand it. They don't want to ask because they don't know if that's inappropriate. So I think mentally ill would kind of be my label, even though I am not personally mentally ill.
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, I understand that. You know, I know that. Like, I mean, I can imagine just someone saying mentally ill. I'm sure you have fears of that happening to you and fears of it being hereditary. But I mean, I'm sure you've done your own research and you know the effects of it. But I'm sure that even just mentally ill itself can be effective, even if you're not mentally ill, because you grew up with it. You understand what mentally ill is, even if you're not mentally ill. You get what that means. Whereas the world sometimes doesn't understand what it means. And I feel like the world also sometimes mislabels mental illness sometimes. Like, I feel like they mislabel just random things as mental illness, and it's not. And I feel like that can be a little annoying at times for you too. But
well, it's like I wouldn't say that I'm like familiar with mental illness as a whole because
you're familiar
all
with
of it
what
is
you've been
so
through.
different. So
Yeah.
I think people assume that it's all one thing, but I'm familiar with. I've met plenty of people and experienced like depression, anxiety, which are two of the biggest things like affecting people in America today, and then dissociative identity disorder. I can't tell you anything about all the other, like people lump it all together, and that's why they don't know how to deal with it because every mental illness requires
It's different.
something different.
Right, yeah. So, at what age did you start attending public school?
I started public school when I was 15, my freshman year. Mom at the time, where she had been like, she had had different jobs because she was in and out of hospitals and stuff. But she had been working for a couple years as an assistant in the dropout prevention program. And she was really good at that job. Because those kids in the high school who were having trouble with like dropout and stuff, like they were at risk for dropping out. A lot of them had mental illness. A lot of them were like misunderstood. A lot of them had been neglected. And she like got that because of everything she had been through. But my sophomore year, she had another like where she had to go back into the hospital. I think she went in like October, and you run out of sick days. I think some people donated their sick days, but she was gone I think until like January. So it was like 4 months. So that was really strange because I was at the high school and all the teachers know your mom's like locked up right now. Like sorry, I use my sense of humor very like poorly sometimes.
No, it's fine. I mean,
but anyway,
it's your way of coping with stuff like that.
But,
yeah.
But she was away at the hospital, and all of my teachers knew everybody. So that was really strange. None of the students did, but all the teachers did, and that was a really weird dynamic.
So, did they ever make you feel uncomfortable because of that, or how was it reacting, like interacting with teachers who knew that your mother was institutionalized?
I kind of felt like some of them were like coddling me, like they were worried that I was gonna like start failing classes and not know how to cope, and I'm like, this has been my life for over 5 years, like this, I'm fine, like it's okay. So some of them I feel like were trying to like cope, or thought they needed to coddle me to help me cope, and then some of them I think it was also like known that mom and dad had requested like for people to donate sick days so that mom wouldn't lose her job. She ended up losing her job, and like all the teachers said no, because I mean, which I totally understand. You only get 10 for being away for 4 months. Everybody would have had to donate like all of their sick days. I wouldn't have done it either. Like I can't, because I worked in the same school system after that, and then I really understood.
Yeah.
I was like, you can't just donate all your sick days. Those are important. So I think some of them were like nervous, like, is she going to be mad at me? Does she know that I told her mom no? Does she know that if we had all donated our sick days, maybe her mom wouldn't have gotten fired? Like, it was weird.
Yeah. So like, was it that the school didn't understand what was going on, or they just had no choice but to fire her?
They had no choice. I mean, if you miss that much work, the school year is only like 8.5 months long, and if you miss 4 months of school.
Yeah.
So, and then she later was like furious and wanted to like sue them or something. But I mean, she didn't have short-term disability. She didn't have long-term disability. She used all of her sick days. I don't think that she was in a position, she hadn't been there long enough to like take a leave of absence. So I mean, I don't blame them personally.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, I can't imagine what that was like. So when you graduated high school and stuff and you got into the real world, do you feel like you faced any, I guess, stigma around your mother being mentally ill, and people thinking you're mentally ill as well?
It wasn't, it was nice because once I left the house, I also, for the most part, left the church, and the church really thinks poorly of you if you're like involved with any sort of mental illness, I think, personally. I know some churches are lovely and they totally understand and are accepting, but that was not my experience. So it was nice to get away from that, and all of my friends were pretty cool about it, but there were just a couple guys that I think once you tell them, and there's like this guy that I have been seeing for like 3 or 4 months, and I just told him about mom like I think last week, because now I'm like, people really have to get to know you and see that you are a normal human being before you let them know that like this is going on in your family.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that if you told someone immediately that they would never speak to you again, or they would think you're crazy and just run away?
I don't think like they would like hands up, run away. She's a psychopath. But I think if it were like a guy, he would then not be. If he had kind of been like flirting, he might be like, never mind. You know, like there would be a difference. Or if we had gone out on a couple dates and we had only been talking for a couple weeks, and then I like said that, that might affect how he felt about me or something. Not very. I don't think like straightforward prejudice, but I think that like internalized, like I automatically think of somebody less subconsciously because
they're
of this
mentally
stigma.
ill.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said that you like, I guess, struggled with religion growing up and how you were treated. Do you care to go into some detail about what happened and like, I guess, your experiences with a specific church that you were going to or things like that, and how mental illness and religion itself kind of, I guess, clashed in a way? Do you care to expand on that?
Yeah, well, for one, this story, it sounds awful, but I really like this story because my dad's the coolest. And I also have a brother who's gay. So there was one period where there was this, I don't want to like name anybody, but he was like a professor at a seminary school or whatever, and he would come and preach sometimes. And he was so old. Like he was really, really old. I think he was in his 80s or late 80s maybe even, and he was so old school. And he talked to my dad one time, and my dad's like, he opened a Christian coffee shop when he was like 18. He's preached forever, like more of his life has been spent as a Christian, like preaching, than hasn't been. And dad's like really passionate about God and stuff, and like going out and evangelizing. And so this professor, this doctor or whatever, went up to dad and he was like, man, I really feel like the Lord is telling me that he wants to use you. He wants to do all these amazing things with you. Like in the church, we went to kind of like Pentecostal churches where they think that like God gives you words and you can share those words with people or like different things. So he was like, he just wants to use you for all these amazing things, but you have to disown your son for being gay and your wife for being mentally ill. And so then my dad, who had been going to church literally forever, as long as we had been alive, he stopped going to church entirely for years, like 4 years, and nobody knew why. And just recently he accidentally let it slip. He never wanted to tell any of us because he thought it would upset Mom and Caleb. But he had looked at him and he said, if that's the only way God wants to use me, he can find someone else. And then he didn't go back to church for years. And oh my gosh, it makes me want to cry. I love my dad so much. But
that's okay. Yeah, I mean, that's
but like my brother and my mom, he like didn't want to tell them because he was worried they would get upset. But they just were like so touched that, I mean, he gave up his whole identity because he loved his family more and he valued his family more. So, but that's just a cool story. But I think in the church, it's just they think if you're still mentally ill, it's because you're not praying hard enough. But sometimes they think it's like the devil. They don't think it's really mental illness or like something actually chemically going on in your brain. They think it's just like the devil messing with you or something. Not like possession, but they think that, you know, when there's an attack of the enemy, sometimes he attacks your finances or your marriage. Sometimes he makes you feel like you're crazy and you're not. And if you believe that you're crazy, then you're just letting into whatever the devil wants, you know?
Yeah.
So they were really judgmental of Mom and thought that she wasn't doing enough as a Christian to combat this mental illness, which they didn't even call mental illness. And then as we got older, my siblings and I, and we started like kind of drifting away from the church, they didn't think, oh, they're leaving the church because we were always judgmental and we treated their mom poorly and we ran their dad off and made him like abandon everything he ever knew because we decided that we didn't like the gay brother and the mentally ill mom. And we told Caleb, my brother, who's a very talented musician, that he can't play on the worship team anymore because he's gay and all this different stuff. They didn't think that. They thought, oh, Carrie's mentally ill. They've had a hard life. That must be what drove them away. And I'm like, no, screw you. It was you. Like, you guys are being jerks.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I think those people, they still don't get that. And like, those are people that like half raised us. Like, from where we were homeschooled and we didn't go to school, the only interaction we had outside of the family was with people from church. And there were people that I've known since I was 4 or 5, and they don't have anything to do with us anymore because we're not religious enough. And I think a lot of times they blame mom for that because now we're heathens.
So, like, how did, like, I guess the first time you ever, I guess, felt the effects of what the stigma of mental illness or even the stigma of sexuality, can you describe how you felt the first time that ever had an effect on you? Like for me, with my sexuality, the first time that it ever really had a real-world effect outside of me growing up in high school and middle school and just growing up in school and then graduating and then getting out in the real world, the first time it ever affected me with my sexuality was getting fired from my job because of it. Mm-hmm. That was the first time I ever felt the effects of my sexuality mattered.
Yeah.
Like, it, to, like, for someone to take their prejudice, which, I mean, I'm completely fine with. Like, you can be prejudiced against me all you want. You can hate me. You cannot like me for my sexuality. But when it affected me making money and me having a life and me progressing my life, it broke me. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't tell you how depressed I was because of that. The kind of rut it put me in. I started flunking my classes. I started doing terribly in the military. Like, that instance, like, put me at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of something like that, did you ever have that kind of effect because of mental illness and religion itself?
Well,
or
my mother and I, we have our own, like, thing where we have not always been the closest for various reasons. Some of it has been, well, it's whatever. But, so at the time when I was in church and being homeschooled, literally growing up in church was all I knew. So when they started treating her differently because she was mentally ill, I didn't pay that much attention to it because, frankly, I just didn't care about her that much at that point in my life. But the first time that I really noticed, like, a big difference was when my brother, it was my freshman year of high school, his freshman year of college, he came out and they told him he wasn't allowed on the worship team anymore. I don't think they even wanted him, like, some of them discussed whether he should even be allowed in the church anymore. And, like, from where we grew up, and I already said my siblings and I are so close, I was enraged, like, worse than I had ever experienced to that point. And then with that, so I'm, like, furious on behalf of my brother, but then also everything that I grew up with, every ideal and, like, code of ethics I had grown up with completely shattered. I didn't believe in, like, I started questioning everything. And so that was, at the time, my identity. When I was younger, I wouldn't say Christian is my identity now, but at the time it was. And it just all, like, blew up in my face. And that was really difficult because, and then later I got to thinking about the way they treated mom. And, you know, my mother and I don't always get along, but it was still messed up how they treated her. And they really,
your mom.
They made her feel like guilty for something that she can't control. They made her feel like they pretty much ousted her. They made her feel uncomfortable and accused until she left because they didn't want her there. They wanted her to either, like, get saved and be a testimonial, like, oh, I was crazy and God saved me, or they just wanted her to get the fuck out. So,
yeah.
But,
and I think, like, you know, since we started talking, I think that you have, like, a really unique perspective because so far in the project, I've had the perspective of people who personally identify with being gay, being agender, being gender fluid, like someone of a different religion, being labeled a terrorist. So I'm getting viewpoints of people like that. But I think your viewpoint is really unique because it's showing the effects of labels on people and their families too. It's showing the effect of a label not just on the person that identifies in that label, but their loved ones, people who love them, people who are their friends, their family, their daughters, their sisters. And I think that this is kind of a cool, like, not going to say cool, I think it's a very important factor to include in this project is the fact that, you know, your perspective is on the outside looking in, but at the same time you're on the inside looking out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you're not mentally ill. I'm not sure what your sexual orientation is, it's not my business, but, you know, I feel like you're looking at this as the fact is your mom's mentally ill, your brother was gay. Those are two labels that affected them personally, but here's how it's affected you too. Mm-hmm. And I think that it shows that labels just not only affect the people that they're labeled under, but it affects the entire world.
Yeah.
It's more than just personal. It's for one person, it's personal for everyone. And I really think that including this is really important because it shows, I guess, a wider spectrum of what the effects of labels can be on people in a way.
Well, that's cool. Well, I'm glad that you think that that's important for the project.
I think it is, though. I think it broadens the perspective.
I mean, it is. Like, if one person is labeled, it does affect everybody that they're involved with.
Because you were even saying before, you're not personally mentally ill, but people have started grouping you as being mentally ill because your mother is.
And not only them. I myself, when I was in college, I started going to a therapist because I was petrified. Because where mom's mental illness had laid dormant until she was 41, 42, I'm like, I don't want to have kids and then be in my 40s and have the same thing happen. I like went to this therapist and I'm like, how can we like bring it out? How can we try to like poke the beast or something? Like try to figure out if I do have something. I'm like, because I feel like some stuff is hereditary and what if I have that? I don't want to put my kids through the same things I went through and yada yada. And she was like, and we talked for a long time. I saw her for several months and she was like, I do not think that you have anything more than maybe like mild anxiety because you're a senior in college. And she was like, but I mean, she's like, this is not strange for you to even be thinking this. This is a valid concern. But I even myself for a long time, and I still struggle with sometimes labeling myself as mentally ill, and I don't have a mental illness. And it's like, but I get so scared that I will, or that I won't know about it, or maybe I'm not being self-aware enough, or, whatever.
Do you think people tend to mislabel themselves as mentally ill a lot of the times? I know this itself is a touchy subject. I know talking about this kind of stuff is very like taboo, but I think it needs to be talked about. Do you sometimes feel like some people just mislabel themselves as mentally ill when they shouldn't?
Or maybe. I think definitely you should like go see a professional before you are, decide for yourself that you are that way. But I mean, some people don't have the financial resources or the insurance to go see a professional. So sometimes, I mean, with like medical like illnesses and injuries and with mental as well, sometimes you end up self-diagnosing because you don't have the funds to go get it professionally done. Yeah,
well, I mean, which would lead into my next question too. In terms of conflict itself, and I guess we can even relate it back to mental illness. What do you believe is the most reason for most conflict we're facing right now? For me, in terms of like my sexuality, I think it's just people not understanding my sexuality. Would you say that's also people just don't understand mental illness, and that's a reason for a lot of conflict?
I would say one of the biggest reasons for conflict is not people think it's because they start arguing and they don't listen to each other and they are screaming. Take like any sort of like political debate or like something about mental illness or like homosexuality, whatever. Almost all of it can be like politicized. But I mean, you see that stuff on Facebook where people are screaming at each other. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's the people who are too polite and nervous to ask or to bring up something that they think might make somebody else uncomfortable. I think there's like 5% of the population that's arguing and being kind of vicious about it, and then there's 95% of the population that just is too nervous to bring it up.
Yeah. And I think that like I can say personally doing this project, since I've asked questions that are kind of difficult to ask and I've covered topics that I feel are difficult to cover, I feel like it's been easier for me to talk about stuff. Like I'm not afraid to ask how someone's dealing with something or ask if someone's okay or even ask what being around a mental illness is like. Because I feel like people,
because you don't want to overstep and you don't want to make somebody uncomfortable. You don't want to pry your nose in their business.
Yeah.
You really have to read each individual that you're talking to. So I mean, it is really hard to differentiate, but I think a lot of us also get too nervous to offer the information. Because like me personally, I have zero issue talking about my mom, everything that I've experienced with religion and the church and school. Like I'm an open book. But I get worried that other people
are not as
receptive to that. And if I start telling them something, like, especially like if I'm hanging out with friends, I don't want to be like the party pooper who starts talking about something negative. It's like, I think we need to get comfortable, like, sharing, and then we need to get comfortable. I think a lot of it, we have to be able to be comfortable to spend time with friends and it not all be upbeat. Like,
Yeah.
you can have conversations about hard stuff and still have a good time with your buddy. Like,
I mean, I completely agree with that. Like, because I sometimes, like, I'm very passionate about what I do. I'm very passionate about social change. I'm very passionate about social design and trying to make the world a better place. I know it sounds a little cliche, but I'm 100% honest about that. I really am. And so people dog me all the time because they're like, you talk about this way too much. It's too serious. And I'm like, but no one wants to talk about it. And I feel like that's the reason we have problems. It's the reason that I think that we have situations that run right now with healthcare, with mental illness, with sexuality, and the way society is right now is because no one wants to talk about it. Everyone wants to just glaze over like it's not happening, but it is happening. These things are happening to people every day, and no one wants to talk about it. And I get infuriated sometimes because I'm just like, if you would just like put aside your own differences and just look at it as, I want to understand you as a person. I want to understand where you're coming from. You know, if someone who doesn't agree with my sexuality or has a negative viewpoint toward it, I want to understand, why do you feel that way, and try to get them to understand why that can be harmful to me. You know, for instance, my job. Like, if I could go back, I would talk to her, the manager that caused me the problems. I'd be like, why do you feel this way? Like, why is this so angering to you? And maybe figure out what happened. And I might never got fired. So I think that it's just, I agree. I think that people should just talk about it, but not be afraid to talk about it, but also do it in a way that's not aggressive. That's just more of, I want to understand you, and then go from there, sort of thing.
and I think if people have the attitude, like, I'm an open book, I'm willing to share anything, and I'm willing to hear anything,
Yeah.
then other people might be willing to offer more. But I mean, we got to get out of this, every time I have a conversation, I want it to be a happy one. Not everything's happy. That's not healthy. Like, not every conversation is meant to be a chipper one.
Yeah.
I just don't think so. So I think if people get comfortable with that, then that would open people up to a lot more.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I think that, I mean, I had this when I was in the military. We had this person come in and was talking about mental illness and was talking about alcohol abuse and things like that. And just talking about a scale that your body puts itself through. If you're way too happy, it's not good. Like, it's unhealthy to be too happy all the time, but it's unhealthy to be too sad all the time. So she was saying what your body does is that, you know, if you have like this high, I think it was dopamine or something, but you're on this high of being happy, you know, your body has a way of just shutting that down a little bit so you don't go crazy and you don't get too happy. And the same with being too negative. If your body is a little bit too negative, your body will do something to make yourself feel a little bit better, to kind of balance it out, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing too that I'm covering in this project is I'm trying to talk about not only the stigma around the labels that I'm discussing, but also the stigma about the region we live in. We both grew up in an Appalachian region. This is Appalachia itself. I feel like, and I've covered this in other interviews too. Do you feel like you've been stigmatized because you're from here too? In terms of like people outside that aren't from here, or people even from here, like, do you feel like, I guess with your mom being mentally ill and your family being having the issues they have, do you feel like that, I guess that's stigmatized because you're Appalachian, that's the way it is, sort of thing?
I don't think so. I think, because I wouldn't consider myself as, like, from the Appalachian region as other people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not from Eastern Kentucky, I'm from Northern Kentucky, and there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even if somebody tells somebody, though, like, I'm from Eastern Kentucky, I know that there are all kind of perceptions that pop up just because somebody said I'm from Eastern Kentucky. And then me saying I'm from Northern Kentucky, every once in a while I get like, oh, Yankee, or, you know, something, but I don't get any of that.
Yeah.
You know, everybody must have been on drugs, even though it was, like, everybody was on drugs, or, like, oh, you guys must be inbred, or you guys must all be, like, whatever, you must all read on a 7th grade level. I know that that's what people think when they talk to people from Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah.
But I haven't personally gotten
Well, because the conversation I'm also trying to spark too is that I'm trying to spark the conversation of, I feel like there's two sides to where we live in, to both the areas that we live at with Kentucky, Virginia, or whatever, just the region we live in.
Yeah.
I feel like there are two sides of it. I feel like people who are from here, you know, I feel like, and personally I grew up in a very prejudiced environment. I feel like the reason I grew up that way is because, one, I feel like it's just a cycle that was never broken. It's just the way that it was back then, and nobody thought to break it. But I also think that people don't get the proper exposure to the outside world. So, for instance, I don't feel like people in our region, or in the world really, but specifically right now for this project, I feel like people in this region don't get the proper exposure to someone who's gay, who is mentally ill, who is from another country. I feel like they have all these perceptions because of false media. I feel like that portrays, and that's what I'm also talking about with conflict, is that I feel like false stories in the media, or stories loaded to one side in the media, I feel like that has a huge effect on the way people are treated here that are different. Because, one, they have a limited amount of news source for them, I feel like they don't do their own research, and I feel like the news they're given isn't the proper exposure to anything. So, do you agree on that aspect of, like, you feel like people here just aren't given the proper exposure to differences, and that's part of the conflict, is that they're just not given the proper exposure to it?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, even take my brother, he was not comfortable coming out of the closet until he went to college in Lexington. It's like, I know so many people from high school, because, you know, we're not like from the Appalachian part of Kentucky, but we're from a very poor county, which sometimes Appalachian, they're also categorized or labeled as poor. So sometimes we get the same things because they're labeled as poor and we were like actually poor. But I know tons of people from high school who didn't come out until after they left the area. And because, I mean, we come from like a really country area of northern Kentucky. I mean, I always tell people northern Kentucky and they think like Florence or Erlanger or something. And then that gets me a little bit more credit. But then if somebody knows where Grant County is, they're like, oh. And it's like a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, if my brother hadn't been gay and my mom hadn't had a mental illness, I don't know how exposed I would have been to those things. Yeah. I think there's definitely a limit to how much we see. I mean, take any type of diversity, like any type. My graduating class had 242 people. It had 2 people of color in it. 240 white people, 2 people of color. I'm like, I don't know. But yeah, like we don't see as much diversity in any aspect as other places do. So
this is leading into my next point too. Do you feel like the outside world doesn't get the proper exposure to areas like this as well? And in terms of, like you said, the 2 people of color living in your area, do you feel like a lot of people who are different don't want to move here because they also don't get the right exposure? Or
I think places like Lexington and Louisville, I don't think people have as much issue moving there. Like those places. Yeah. I don't think people willingly move to like Grant County, and I think all the people who are more progressive and open-minded typically, or like more diverse, typically leave. Yeah. I mean,
well, because I've met people in these areas that are really small that are stigmatized as being bad for diversity, but I've met people who are really open to that. They're really great about it. They're really accepting of it, but I feel like they don't get the exposure that's needed. One, I don't think they talk about it enough. I don't think they're open enough about, yes, I'm accepting, yes, I'm not the typical person that lives here. I feel like, you know, people should be more open to themselves and also not be afraid, because I feel like they're going to face the same stigma as we do. Yeah. As if they wanted to be open to it, I feel like they're going to face the same stigma. So my idea is that I've met a lot of people. I have a lot of allies here that are from here, that are straight, white, Christian, that are just not as different as we are. And so, you know, I've met them and they're great people, but they don't get the kind of exposure that they should. They're grouped as being racist, homophobic, as being terrible people because of the exposure that areas like this gets. So what I was saying is that, like, do you agree on that aspect too, that the outside world doesn't get exposed to those people, the real heart of this area? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because, like, I was talking to some people in my unit. When I first came out, it was really difficult because it was when the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law came out. So it was very taboo, and I was very scared to be open about my sexuality in my unit. But eventually, when all those people who disagreed with me and hated it left, I was left with people who were very accepting of me. And toward the end of my military career, I felt a lot safer in my unit. I felt I had made a lot more friends. I felt people were totally okay with me. And I felt like my experience was better. And I also felt like I helped them become more comfortable with it because they had just never been exposed, I guess, to
Yeah.
someone who's gay or someone who's different.
I think a lot of it is like younger people too. Like our generation is a lot more accepting, like homosexuality and bisexuality, asexuality, like all of those different things, gender fluidity. They're not as taboo as they used to be.
Yeah.
For us, like we have gotten more used to it. I think older generations it's still hard to grasp. But I mean, how like maybe our parents' generation was the first one that was like pretty okay with interracial marriage. But maybe our grandparents struggled with it, you know, something like that. I think a lot of it has been the age also. But I don't think people always see that. They think people who come from rural regions will always believe what their parents did.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
Because I also have this theory, I have this idea that I think the reason that rural areas are really poor is because not enough people want to live there. Not enough people want to bring their revenue there. Not enough people want to bring their business there, want to bring their education there. And I feel like because of that, because of the stigma those areas have, and because no one's really wanting to change it, I feel like those areas are just going to stay poor. And, you know, I just, for me, I don't want kids to go through that. Because growing up, we were very poor too. And, you know, I remember just hating it all the time. I remember, like, I felt like I didn't have a chance. And I don't want kids to feel like that. I don't want people to feel like that in general. Like, so one thing I'm hoping that can happen with this project, or even just eventually in the world, if somebody else can do it, just help change that stigma so that way areas like that don't have to live like that anymore and can also adapt and change, and people can just have a happier life in a way, I guess.
Also good for us for making something of ourselves. Because I don't think people understand the gravity of that hopelessness when you grow up really, really poor and you don't think that there's any actual way to get out of it.
No, I was hopeless as a kid. And it wasn't like my dad's disabled. So he was very sick and he got diagnosed with epilepsy and he lost his job. So going from two parents making a lot of money who worked at an airport, and my dad was also a welder, so they were making a lot of really nice money and they were doing really well for themselves. And then my dad lost his job. Like, we lost our house, just everything. Just, you can imagine, it was awful. We had to bounce around from home to home. But it was because my dad got diagnosed with epilepsy and he lost his job. But growing up like that, you know, just not really having any means, because, I mean, let's face it, our society doesn't really help those in need like that. They kind of just, if you're poor, you kind of stay poor, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I watched my parents struggle so much as a kid, and I thought I was going to live like that the rest of my life. I thought that this is my life. I'm never going to get out of here. I'm always going to be sad. I'm always going to be depressed. I'm always going to hate my life. Thankfully, I'm not. Thankfully, my mom and dad pushed me. My mom and dad helped me so much and helped me get out. You know, I joined the military and I got out, but, you know, thankfully I had loving parents to help me do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I understand. I think we need to spread the message to kids and like that and be like, look, there's hope out there for you. You know, or even, you know, I was also talking to my mom about another part of the project too, with just different viewpoints. Maybe if some kid watches this and they're, you know, thinking, oh, I feel like I'm different. I feel like I have feelings for someone like me, feelings for the same sex. Maybe we can spread the message that, you know, it's not, just because you live in an area that isn't accepting doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. It will get better. You just can't give up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, yeah. But no, people I don't think understand the gravity of what it's like to get out of that.
I know. Because there was even, when I was going, like, I had gotten my grades and everything real good, like, I did all my applications for college on time, because that was, like, my way. Like, there was no way I was going to join the military, so, like, it was college or nothing. Yeah. And so, but then there was a question right before I was supposed to leave, do I have the gas money to drive to Richmond? And if I didn't have that gas money, I would miss my first day of classes, and then I wouldn't be able to go, and then they would automatically drop me from all the first classes.
And there goes your future.
Then I would lose my scholarship because I didn't.
Yeah. And
like, I didn't go to school at the time I was supposed to enroll. There goes everything, and it's because I didn't have an extra $10 to put in my gas tank. And I ended up, I don't remember what happened, but we scrounged it up. But people don't get. I just spent $20 on a pizza. Like, people don't get that literally $5 or $10 makes a lot of difference for people growing up like that. Like, it can make a world of difference.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like, when my aunt helped me get back into the dorms, the amount that she paid was I think it was one of the continuing reasons of why I stayed in school. I feel like if she hadn't been generous enough to help me, and she hadn't been the loving woman that she is, and if she hadn't helped me, I would have never finished school. I didn't have anywhere to go. You know, I'd just gone through a really bad relationship, and I, needed somewhere to live. So just having that generosity of me not having the money for that, but her just, helped me like that was so tremendous. And I feel like because of that, it really is what really helped me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think people realize the struggle of growing up really poor in an area like we lived in.
Yeah.
And also people who live in pure Appalachia. Like, I have people that I've interviewed and there's people that I'm friends with that grew up in eastern Kentucky, like coal mines of eastern Kentucky, and areas that, your chances of getting out of there are slim because of just how difficult it can be. And so the fact that they got out of there and came to college and are making something of their lives is so monumental that nobody understands. You don't know what they've had to sacrifice to get here.
And there are so many that I think when people think about the people who stay in Eastern Kentucky or in like poorer places, they think they were too dumb to go to college, they were too unmotivated or unfit to join the military.
Sometimes people just don't have the opportunity
they
to do that.
didn't have any motivation to do something with themselves. No, maybe they didn't have that fucking $10 for gas.
Yeah.
Like, and that was it. And that determined the course of their immediate future. Probably their long-term future.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like, I know people who would have loved to have gotten out. They just didn't have the money or the opportunity. And it's saddening, it really is, because, it's heartbreaking to know that they're getting left behind because they're not from a certain financial status.
Yeah.
Or because of the stigma they're raised in.
Yeah. And then that whole region is labeled as stupid, unmotivated, and it's like, that's not true. They just were born into this poverty, and people are like, pull up your bootstraps and you can go and accomplish anything in the good of old US of A. And I'm like, but no, you can't though. Like, that's not true. Like, that's a fantasy.
But relating this back to the struggle and stuff, I feel like that itself, what we just talked about with terms of being really poor, I feel like that's because people just never had conversations to bring more people here, to make it more of a place that people want to live, that people want to raise their families, that people want to bring their businesses in. So these places just stay poor. And I feel like when we talked about Appalachia not accepting difference and the people not accepting Appalachia, I feel like it's all because our generation specifically was brought up by another generation who was just completely different than us. And so I feel like it's our job to change that because it's not like that anymore. And it's our job to fix that, in a sense. I feel like if people just had a common ground to talk about things, which is why I love the idea of human. Being human is the first thing that we can identify as. We're two very different people, but when we say that we're human, it makes us common, and it gives us ground to stand on. So I feel like if people just did that, then you can make it, I guess, over time, make areas like we come from more of an appealing place to live, which means that the more people that live there, it could possibly mean more jobs for people, more opportunities for kids like us, more opportunities for people who just never got the proper things they needed because of the situation they were born in. And I feel like it's all boiling down to just talking about it and changing the stigma and just bringing change to where we come from, sort of thing. Yeah. So my last question I want to ask you is, well, actually not the very last question, but what do you think it means to be human?
I mean, I don't have some poignant answer. I have a way more technical answer.
No, you can talk about
just
it.
like the species, we're all human. Just if we are, just we're human. That is our species. We can't change it. There's nothing we can do about it. We are arguably, it's iffy sometimes, but the most intelligent species on the planet. We can thrive in lots of different climates like other species can. What?
No, it's not.
Were you expecting something deep?
No. Yeah, a little bit. But no, I mean, I agree with you. There's a
But I
technical
mean, there are
stance
lots of animals that experience all the emotions that we feel.
Yeah.
There are lots of animals that go through different conflicts that we go through. The only difference is because we're more intelligent, ours are a little bit more complex.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, you can look at it as that, because some people will look at it as, like, we're biologically the same, no matter what your label is, no matter if you're gay, no matter if you're straight, no matter if you're Christian, no matter if you're whatever the world calls you, you're biologically the same species. So, I mean, that's a good point.
And I don't see any other fucking species trying to, like, kill each other all the time. There probably are some species like that, and I don't know enough about biology.
So one other point I want to make too is that we talked about, you know, how difficult it was, you know, growing up with the stigma of mental illness, but also growing up poor in regions like this. So if you could say anything to someone who feels the way that we felt, or feels the way that you felt growing up, or the way that somebody else feels, what would you say to them, I guess, as in the broader spectrum, I guess?
I would say ask people for help. Like, if you're growing up really poor and you go to some sort of guidance counselor or somebody at church or somebody and you say, I need $10 to get to school, then somebody, I think, will help you. I don't think you're as alone as you think you are. If you are dealing with the stigma of mental illness and you maybe can have somebody that you really trust that you can talk to about it, they might say, oh, my aunt has this disorder or something that, like, really normalizes it for you. I think that it's important to find people that you can, like, confide in, and to actually, even though you think they don't want to hear the negative, I think if it's somebody who's like a true friend or a true mentor, they will listen to the negative. And I think it's important to let that out and not just keep all of that to yourself. Because I think when we actually talk, it normalizes a lot more that you probably think
isn't normal. Yeah. I like that. And what would you also say to somebody who, I guess, is watching this video who, I guess, is on the outside looking in a way, who might not identify as mentally ill or identify as any label we've covered in these interviews? What would you say to them?
If somebody starts, like, talking about mental illness, don't get jumpy too fast. Like, just hear them out. And I mean, if something they're sharing makes you uncomfortable, you can maybe pause the conversation. But if they're opening it up to you and they want to share that with you, I think it's important for you to be open to it. And I think it's healthy for you to understand that stuff better.
Yeah, because if we, like, I mean, I really like the point you're saying of normalizing it. Because a lot of things that I feel like I'm covering just haven't been normalized. You know, sexuality differences, just they're being normalized more, but they're not completely normalized everywhere. So you face that mental illness, definitely is not normalized. It's definitely, and I feel like the idea of normalizing it is just being familiar with it so you're not scared of it. And I feel like that's where a lot of it comes from, is people are just scared of what they don't understand.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's because they don't understand it and because they're scared of it is where prejudice comes from, is where mistreatment comes from, is where all this struggle that we have comes from. It's just fear of not knowing what it is, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you talking about this stuff, and I really want to thank you for contributing to the project and let's make some change.
No problem.